identity, Reid Vanderburgh. Reid is a trans man who began his transformative process in 1995. So please join me in welcoming Reid Vanderburgh and Colin Jones to the stage now.
Awkward transitions. Just do it a little more. I want to be able to see you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Welcome. Welcome, everybody. I'm Colin. That's Reid.
I'm Reid.
Hello. So I am excited to talk about vocabulary and pronouns and why it matters and why all of that is so important and powerful. But I'd love to start by grounding us just to get to know you a little bit better. And so I was wondering if you could give us your, let's say, 3-minute life story. So like the Cliff Notes version, right? The really tight piece. What led you here?
Well, 64 years in 3 minutes.
Yeah, I believe in you.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you, Colin. I'm not one of those trans men who understood really young exactly who I was. I knew at a young age that I felt different. Excuse me. And I didn't know why. I didn't fit in with the girls, so I gravitated toward tomboy, and that was okay. But it wasn't quite right. I had a lot of anxiety growing up, and puberty didn't make it any better. But when I was 19, I fell in love with a woman, and I thought, oh, I must be a lesbian. That must explain everything about why I felt different and didn't fit in. And over the years, I've actually heard a number of lesbian friends of mine say similar things. So it seemed to make sense. But as my 20s and 30s progressed, I was increasingly anxious, not decreasingly anxious the way that they were. They were establishing lives, and I was marking time. And by the time I was almost 40, I had a partner, and that partner came out to me one night and said, I've always felt like a man inside, and if I had the money, I'd have an operation tomorrow. Well, that was like being hit in the head with a 2x4, because all of a sudden I was reeling with anxiety, because that was stripping away my denial much more quickly than was really good for me. Fast forward, eventually I realized, oh my God, me too. And I proceeded with transition, and that was 1995. It took a while to extricate myself from the lesbian community. I was a founding member of the Portland Lesbian Choir. Leaving that group was not on my horizon, not a welcome idea. I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to have to do it, but I did. Once you realize who you are, it's pretty hard to slam the door on it again. And I just couldn't do it. So I went back to school. I became a therapist. I wrote 2 books. I'm married now to a woman. Now I sing in the Portland Gay Men's Chorus. So I've made quite a transition. And I have done for 11 years. So now, 11 years, that's how long I was in the Portland Lesbian Choir, with 7 years in Confluence Mixed Chorus in between. So I'm the only person who has sung in every gala chorus.
That's great.
So now here I am today. I retired as a therapist. I do this sort of thing. I write. I do consultation and things of that sort. And that's me in, was that 3 minutes? Did I do it?
That was pretty close. That was good. Yeah, you might have even come under. Like, that was impressive. So we're here to talk about pronouns. That's super helpful. Love that context. Thank you. And so I just want to do a real quick double check. It's been a while since grammar school for a lot of us. And so who knows what a pronoun is, like, and is like feeling pretty confident? Okay. Not quite 100% of the room. So pronouns, right? Pretty basic. They're the words we use to refer to each other. I, me, you, he, she, they, them, us, all of those. So hopefully that grounds everybody enough. I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty of that. But why does that matter when we're talking about trans folks or non-binary folks?
Well, this is one of the big differences between being lesbian, gay, or bisexual and being trans. Lesbian, gay, and bi are about who you're attracted to. We don't talk about people and say, oh, that's gay John over there. Or, oh, that's lesbian Lisa. No, we just say that's Lisa, or that's John. We might say, if the context is right, oh, and I think he's gay, but that's the end of that. You don't refer to people by their sexual orientation as an identifier. He and she are gender identifiers. And that's why it matters so much to trans people, because that's about your relationship to yourself. Is he and she, are one of those right for you? If not, and you change that pronoun, people may still be calling you by the other pronoun, and they are identifying your identity. That's your identity that is on the line every time somebody uses a pronoun. And so when people use the wrong pronoun, it's very painful for that reason, because you're talking about someone's identity. I don't think that you can count the number of times in a day that you use pronouns for people. It's an autopilot process. We automatically assess gender, we assign gender by looking at someone, and then we use a pronoun for them without second thought. So when someone says to you, oh, well, I'm changing my gender pronoun, it's hard to do because it's an autopilot process to use the pronoun. So it takes practice. And that's the takeaway from all this, is if you have a friend or a coworker, colleague, casual acquaintance who tells you, please use they for me now, or please use he now for me instead of she, or whatever the change is, go home and practice. Take a look at a picture of that person if you have one, and just practice and say, okay, this person now uses that pronoun, because the more you practice, the less likely you are to slip. But that's why it matters so much, because you are using their identity every time you use a pronoun.
That's super helpful. And so, are you willing to talk? Could you share a little more about your experience changing pronouns and what that was like, and were there certain things you did to educate or encourage people in your life? And was that pretty straightforward? Was it hard? What did that look like?
I changed my name before I changed my pronouns, because in 1995, when I realized I needed to transition, like I said, it took a while to extricate myself from the lesbian choir. I knew that the choir would be producing a CD in 1997, and I wanted my voice and my name on that CD, so I waited 2 years. Basically, I lived that non-binary in-between space for 2 years when that wasn't really my identity. It taught me a lot about what it's like to move through the world confusing people. At Portland State University, my name was Reid. I didn't really use a pronoun for myself. I only ever used the men's bathroom at PSU. No one questioned anything. Guys don't question each other in the bathroom. It just doesn't happen. I'm 6 feet tall. I'm fortunate in that regard. In the lesbian choir, I was still she, but people started trying to change names for me. And a shout out for that organization. They were only ever supportive of me. They were very unhappy that I had to leave, but they were very supportive of me. They were upset because I was leaving, not because I was trans. So I shout out to them in the mid-1990s. That was the response I got from that organization. So it was really difficult for me because I was living in between. I was he over here at PSU most of the time, and I was she in the lesbian choir without any question at all. Walking through the world, I don't know what people thought because I never said anything. I'm a very extroverted person. I'm really out there. I love doing that. But at that period of time, I wasn't going to talk unless spoken to, because my voice was the only thing that would have given me away. That's the only thing where people would have said, oh, you're a she, because I wasn't taking hormones yet. I could not afford to take hormones before that CD was recorded.
And so you talked about earlier encouraging folks to avoid sort of the impulse to look at someone, gender them, and start using those pronouns. And so, which I think is a super ingrained habit certainly in American society, and I think in a lot of the world. And so what's the alternative that you would encourage? Should we be going up to strangers and asking, what's your pronoun? Or like, how should a person that wants to do right by folks, what's the way to navigate that?
I wouldn't go up and ask somebody, what's your pronouns? That's kind of like going up to somebody and asking, are you gay? You wouldn't really do that to someone you don't know. So this is all about identity, and identity is very personal. It's something we own. It's something we determine on our own. Is there really a need to know their pronoun? That's the first question, is why are you asking? We have an imperative in this culture. We seem to need to gender people. We need to know. Why? Where is this need to know coming from? Where is this stemming from? It's this deep-seated thing in all of us, and that's why we assess people's gender from the get-go. Now, part of it is because we need to establish what our social boundary is. I used to be a therapist, so I know a lot about boundaries and things of that sort. Women with women don't have the same boundary as women with men, men with men, the social boundary shifts. And depending on how you've assessed somebody's gender, it gives you clues, kind of automatic autopilot clues about how to treat this person, what to talk about, how close to stand, how close can you let this person be to you, and on all kinds of levels. So when we assess someone's gender and then we find out that we made a misassumption, that can tweak some people, and they can get a little upset about that. The problem is they tend to get upset at the person that they misassumed about. So it's difficult when someone transitions because you're asking someone to change the social boundary and you're telling them that what they thought they knew about you before wasn't right and it's in the realm of gender. And that really upsets a lot of people. Not everybody. There are people who don't understand why others are upset about this. And there's a lot of people who are upset. So it gets to be a tricky conversation because you never, if you're transitioning, I've heard so many people say the people I thought would take it the best took it the worst. The people I thought would take it the worst took it the best. You never really quite know what to expect when you tell someone, oh, this is who I am and this is what I'm about to do. I would not say that I lost any friends when I transitioned, but I would say that the order of ranking of friendship did change because I had some people who approached me proactively and said, this is great, congratulations. Those people moved way up on my list of people I wanted to hang out with. And I wouldn't say we weren't friends before, but we became a lot better friends when they said that. But my best friends, now I understand. 24 years ago, I didn't really understand this. My best friends were grieving. They were losing me because I was leaving lesbian community. So the people I was really close to, they were upset because I was transitioning and they knew, on some level, they knew that this was going to change our friendship forever. And they were right. It did. I'm not as close to them as I was.
That's really helpful. So one of the things I pulled out of that was with strangers or people you don't know super well, like mind your own business is a good strategy. Like you maybe don't need to know. And then you started talking about sort of the experience among closer friends. And one of the things that you received really well was sort of congratulations or encouragement. What are other things, sort of navigating those tricky conversations, as you called them? What are things that either you yourself or colleagues or friends or clients or whomever, what are things that are received really well? Like what are the right things for friends and family to do when sort of experiencing this conversation?
One really helpful thing is to ask questions, because asking questions shows that people had an interest in what I was doing. They wanted to know more in order to be supportive. So asking questions because you want to support a friend, that's great. Avoiding questions altogether, not so much, because it is a huge big deal when somebody is transitioning. And when I use the word transitioning, I'm not talking strictly about hormones and surgery. I'm talking about the one thing that we all have in common, and that is that we have questioned the gender we were assigned at birth. Moving away from that, even if you're saying my pronouns are they, them, I'm non-binary, I'm gender non-conforming, I'm genderqueer, something of that sort, that is still not the gender you were assigned at birth, and it's still a transition. You're still expecting or hoping that the people in your life will see you the way you see yourself and will acknowledge that and honor that. And that leads to even more questions than someone transitioning the direction I did. People might not understand why, but they understand guy. They understand trans man. They understand wanting he as a pronoun instead of she. They, them, and saying I'm not either one, or I'm both and, or I'm neither or I'm something, I'm a third thing altogether, or I'm everything altogether, or sometimes I feel more male than female, sometimes more female than male, sometimes both at the same time. You will hear lots of different explanations for they, them. None of them are right and none of them are wrong. They are all right for the person who is saying it to you. So then it may lead to other questions, but as long as your questions are based in wanting to know your friend better and supporting them, that is what people really crave, because then you're trying to understand a friend and you're not just glossing over something they said because you're uncomfortable. And this is where getting past your own discomfort with people changing the gender you thought about them, challenging the gender system, it's hard to get past that discomfort. It's hard to own it. But really, we all have it because we were raised in this culture that sees gender as fixed reality. We think we can look at a baby and say it's a boy or it's a girl. We think we can have a gender reveal party. Well, excuse me, if you really wanted to do that one right, wait till that child's 4th birthday and then have a party and let them tell you who they are. That would be a gender reveal party.
There you go. I love that. So I'm thinking about a couple kind of nitty-gritty practical things. So shifting gears a little bit. So one is I sometimes hear people struggle with they, which I just want to note that Merriam-Webster just declared they the word of the year, which just feels very timely. It was like yesterday. So some people really struggle with they as a singular pronoun, right? They were taught, it was drilled into them in that aforementioned grammar school that it's only a plural. How do you navigate that, or how do you react to that or think about that?
Well, in some sense, I agree with them because the age that I am, I was taught a lot of grammar as a kid. The problem that we run into is that we have a very binary culture, and that binary nature translates itself to gender as well, and so we only acknowledge two. Well, if you believe yourself, know yourself to be more than that, beyond that, whatever language that person uses, what do? He doesn't work and she doesn't work. You have to use something. 10, 12 years ago, there was an attempt at creating new pronouns. HIR was one of them, here. ZIE was another one, Z. And then people started gravitating toward they, them instead, because that's already a word. HIR will trip your spell check every which way to Sunday. They, them will not. At least it's a word people know what you said. So people are trying different things to try to fit their identity into a language that has no space for it. Trying to carve out space within a language that only has binary options. So they are trying, they, them. And I don't know what will happen in the future, whether this may stick. It may be that people gradually wrap their minds around the fact, and we do use they for individual people. Oh, I think they left their coat. Can you grab that person? They left their coat. We do that all the time without thought. So why not?
Mm-hmm. So another thing that I've heard, and this is particularly, I think I hear this most often from parents of trans adults or trans children, which is when referring to their child sort of in the past, they really struggle with sort of appropriate gendering. And have you found, do you have any advice for those parents? Or have you found sort of a successful, like what helps them flip the switch and sort of properly gender their kid consistently?
Well, the main thing is to have the conversation between the generations. So have the trans, I had to say child, because it could very well be an adult. Right. Talk to the parent and vice versa. Have a conversation about it. And have the kid say, have me say to my mom, this is how I felt as a child. Now, this is also a very individual thing. I'm very big on history, and I'm very big on owning my own history. I am not one of those people who will ever not come out. I'm out everywhere I go. But I've got littermates who transitioned with me back in the mid-90s. Some of them I've completely lost touch with because they're just off living their lives. Now, it may sound like that's the same thing as being in the closet for a gay man or a lesbian to like deny your identity and let people think you're straight. But I'll tell you, those guys are off living their lives, and every time somebody uses the right name and pronoun for them, it affirms their identity, and in no way do they feel like they're in the closet. They're just choosing not to tell everybody in the world how they got there. And the way I look at it, me sitting up here talking like this, I'm speaking for them, because they don't want to speak for themselves. But I put a face to what it looks like to transition in 1995. I love doing this, which means I have no problem at all telling you all that my name used to be Nancy. Okay, it was until 1996 when I changed it legally. My mother, I knew that she had made it in my transition when I was about 2 or 3 years into it. And she did one of those mom things of telling the same story, that something that happened when I was 6 years old. You know how moms are. And she referred to me in the story as Reid. And I thought, you made it. I didn't say a word to her. I didn't say anything I never told her because I knew that she had done it unconsciously, but I never asked her to. It would have been okay with me if she'd used my birth name because historically that is who I was at that time. Not every trans person would say that. Some of my litter mates would say, oh man, I hate it when my mom uses my old name. They might call it their dead name. Because to them, that person died when they transitioned. That's not how I view it. It's all me. A longtime lesbian friend of mine a couple of years ago dubbed me an honorary lesbian. And I was flattered, absolutely flattered. I thought she had welcomed me back into the circle. And I thought, this is fabulous.
Oh, that's great.
I know a lot of trans men who would never feel that way about it. So that's the main thing, is to have a conversation, take it seriously, mom and adult child, have a conversation about it, and find out how you each feel about it, and go through that grief process that mom went through to let go of that kid. My mom had to let go of having a youngest daughter. That's not an easy thing to ask your mom to do. My siblings had to have a younger brother and not a younger sister. It's really hard for families because all of those relationships are gendered and they have a lot of gendered baggage with them. I'm not a sister anymore in that family. I'm a brother. I'm an uncle. I'm not an aunt. So it's a big change to expect, but having a serious conversation about it, taking each other seriously, that will help a lot.
That's great. Before we came up here, I warned you that the 20 minutes would go by super fast. So we're about there. I do want to close just by asking you, so 1995, it's about 25 years ago. So I imagine a lot has changed since then. And so, but actually what I'm curious about is, like, when you look forward to the next 25 years, what do you see on the horizon? What feels like it's improving or growing or changing or shifting?
Well, people have often asked me, was it harder in the 90s to transition? And they assume my answer would be yes, and my answer actually is no. I think it was easier. I had the internet to find each other, to find support, and I was not on anybody's radar, so there wasn't anyone to oppose me. There was no legislation to oppose me or support me. I didn't exist as far as mainstream culture was concerned. So that was harder. Now things are on the radar. But what I'm really reminded of is the quote from Gandhi. First they ridicule you. Well, first they ignore you. Then they ridicule you. Then they fight you. Then you win. So what it looks like to win is to have legislation in place. But what it also looks like to win is have education in place, to have a lot more allies than we do enemies, to have people step up and say, now that was not good what you just did. And I think that that is the sort of thing that we see happening more and more as time goes by. But that's what it's going to take, because gender is such a hot button issue. I'm having conversations now with some of my lesbian friends who have friends who are extremely upset about the presence of trans women in their spaces, and they are very unhappy. And I understand where that's coming from. But is it going to be that way going into the future? I'm not so sure. Having more education in the schools, having more policies in the schools that allow children to transition younger. I helped facilitate some of the first transitions socially in the elementary schools in this city, in this area. Now, it's much more common. But at the time, the schools were like, oh, we don't know what to do here. They weren't saying we won't do it, they were saying, how do we do it? So I think the how-to is going to change a lot. Many more things are being made possible by different organizations stepping up. We're on the radar now with a lot of different social service organizations in a way that was never possible in the past.
That's great. I love it. It's a beautiful vision. Let's all give Reid a hand. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're going to take a break of about a little less than 15 minutes. So 7:15, we'll circle back here, grab a bite from the back, grab a drink, join us all back, and we'll be here for part 2. Thank you very much. 7:15.